Zagreus sits inside your head. Zagreus lives among the dead. Zagreus sees you in your bed and eats you when you're sleeping. Neverland, the 33rd Doctor Who main range Big Finish release, first released in two parts across CD and download on the 12th of July 2002 and written by Alan Barnes. This is also pretty much the culmination of the second series in the main range of 8 Doctor adventures that started with Invaders from Mars. Now, the Doctor, played once again by Paul McGann, and his companion, Charlie Pollard, voiced by India Fisher, they've just managed to escape from their previous adventure, The Time of the Daleks, and are kind of heading off on their way, with the Daleks now somehow stuck in the Time Vortex or the Time Void or wherever, when they suddenly see the Time Lords heading off to deal with the Daleks. But the Doctor seems a little on edge, as he says to Charlie that she's been travelling with him now for 6 months, so he assumed by now it has to be her birthday, so he's going to drop her off someplace where she can party. He's going to leave her there for a full year so that she can have a party, and that he can go and sort something out with the Time Lords that he needs to do so. However, Charlie is not quite so sure, and she cottons on quite quickly that something is up with the Doctor, and she knows that it's because she was supposed to die on the R101. To which, rather than take the Doctor's offer of going to a party and just trying to eke out her existence for too much longer, she ultimately presses a button on the control panels of the TARDIS that will return them to Gallifrey, and so the Time Lords can put her back. Because she says to the Doctor that, well, she compares him rather to Peter Pan, a story that her family used to read her when she was younger. Says that the Doctor is like an ageless god, constantly partying, having fun, going off on mad adventures, just like Peter Pan. And she is like Wendy Darling, well, it was in the story. But the thing was, in the story, Wendy Darling did eventually grow up. She knew she had to grow up sooner or later. And so she wants to just do that. She doesn't want to kind of continually doing this if it's going to cause problems, so she'd rather just return back to the way things were. The Doctor tries to stop her, but they end up on Gallifrey at the mercy of the Time Lord President, Romana Dvorak-Nelunda, or better known as Romana, who, once again, played by Lalla Ward, who, I think the last time we saw her in this kind of branch of Doctor Who was in the 6th Doctor story, The Apocalypse Element. I could be wrong there, but I think her last opinion was The Apocalypse Element. And likewise, they have just had to do with whatever time problems the Daleks are having, but then things start to become a little bit tricky. As there's Romana, voiced once again by Lalla Ward, another Time Lord named Coordinator Vansel, voiced by Anthony Keach, and they also have to deal with members of the Celestial Intervention Agency, including some of its recruits, including Kirst, voiced by Peter Trapan, and Levith, voiced by Holly King. And they also are tracking something down belonging to Rassilon, voiced, of course, by Don Warrington. Now, I have brought this up several times in this particular series, but Don Warrington did also appear in Doctor Who in Rise of the Cybermen, and it is nice to hear him get another role here as the Time Lord President Rassilon. He's got the kind of dulcet tones that kind of show he's a man in charge, and similar with Donald Sumter and Timothy Dalton, he feels like a good choice for Rassilon. But the one thing that they have to do, aside from kind of questioning the ethics of what to do with Charlie, whether to put her back in, the Doctor constantly trying to plead for Charlie to be allowed to remain with him, they also have to deal with a dark side of Gallifrey that they've had to kind of deal with for years. And that's the use of the Oubliette of Eternity, a device which was used against Time Lords who committed high treason. And once these Time Lords were used with the Oubliette of Infinity, or Eternity, they seemingly ceased to exist. However, where they went was to a universe of anti-time. And similar to matter and antimatter, anti-time cannot really exist with traditional time. So they end up going into a universe of anti-time to try and figure things out, including encountering various people who claim they know them, including a brother and sister duo named Rorvan and Taris, played once again by Mark McDonnell and Nicola Boyce, two actors who I have actually commented on who've been in the previous two stories, Embrace the Darkness and The Time of the Daleks. It's nice to hear them back again. And they claim to know Romana, although she doesn't remember them. That's because they were a brother and sister duo who they went looking in the archives of Gallifrey to try and find out what happened to their parents, but that constituted high treason, and so they were sent there. And another thing they have to deal with is a kind of image of Charlie. Well, it's taking Charlie's image, and it calls himself Centris. And it's essentially trying to trick them into allowing them to head back to Gallifrey with the Tomb of Rassilon. But the Tomb of Rassilon doesn't actually contain the body of Rassilon, but rather actually contains pieces of anti-time, so that the anti-time universe can take over Gallifrey and ultimately take over time itself. Now, this story is only 2 parts, but it's about as long as a typical 4-part story, and I do think that does kind of bring it a little bit down in that with each of the other stories that were 4 parts, I mean, this clearly is a big event, so it's only 2 parts long, but the 2 parts are stretched out to be roughly 4 parts long in length. And I don't know, it maybe does bring it down a little, just because you're dealing with a lot all at once. They're constantly throwing stuff at you. But I don't know, it feels suitably grand for an end to this particular run of stories. Like, more stories would, of course, be to come, including the kind of big slither points about this, but I think it's a good story, and I think you should listen to it through for yourself. I think it's a good story. It's just a little, possibly overly packed, maybe a little overly long. But I don't know. Listen to it and see for yourself. Now, ultimately, as they get to the end of the story, Charlie is somewhat resurrected by the Time Lords, but then she sees an image of the Doctor and begins walking over to him, but it's revealed not to be the Doctor at all. A creature or a being that has been mentioned throughout the story. One who is said to be like an old Gallifreyan fairy tale, an old nursery rhyme, something to tell the children. But he's revealed to be not the Doctor, but Zagreus, which will ultimately lead into the Doctor Who story, Zagreus. Now, Zagreus is not the next story I've got lined up. I mean, I've got several to go before I get there, but I'll let you know what happens with Zagreus when I get there. Anyway, until next time, see ya. There's a lot to get through.